you thought the anxious suffered more. The avoidance reality is far worse. We often hear a lot about anxious attachment, the desperate, overwhelming need for connection, the fear of rejection, the endless questioning of whether they're loved enough. And yes, that's painful. But today I want to shine a light on a different, often misunderstood experience, the avoidance reality. Avoidant individuals carry a weight that's hidden beneath a mask of independence and self-sufficiency. They don't just shut people out for no reason, they do it because deep down vulnerability terrifies them. While anxious people might scream for connection, avoidants build walls so high that even they sometimes get trapped inside. Their struggle isn't always visible, but it's profound. They suffer from loneliness wrapped in self-reliance. They crave closeness but push it away before it gets too close. They guard their hearts fiercely, fearing loss, rejection, and the vulnerability that love demands. So don't mistake their distance for strength or indifference. It's a defense mechanism, a protective shield against a pain they often refuse to admit, even to themselves. The avoidance reality, it's a silent, lonely struggle, one that deserves compassion, understanding, and healing. Avoidant attachment is often mistaken for emotional strength, independence, or simply a lack of interest in relationships. People see someone who keeps their distance, who doesn't share much about their feelings, and they assume that person is strong, confident, or simply doesn't care. But that's a huge misunderstanding. What's really going on beneath the surface is far more complex. The avoidance emotional distance is not a sign of indifference, it's a shield. It's a defense mechanism built over time to protect against vulnerability, which they find incredibly frightening. Vulnerability means opening yourself up to the possibility of pain, rejection, and loss. And for an avoidant, those possibilities feel unbearable. So rather than risk getting hurt, they keep people at arm's length, often without even fully realizing why. When you look closely, avoidants are constantly managing an internal battle between their desire for connection and their fear of it. They want to be close, to be understood, and to be loved, but they also feel trapped by those very desires. The fear of getting too close, of needing someone so much that it leaves them exposed, creates a tension inside that drives them to withdraw or detach emotionally. This distancing is their way of controlling the situation, of managing the risk. It's not because they lack emotions or don't care. In fact, many avoidants feel deeply but are terrified to show it because they've learned that showing their true feelings can lead to pain or abandonment. This dynamic is rooted in past experiences. Often, avoidants grew up in environments where expressing emotions wasn't safe or encouraged. Maybe caregivers were emotionally unavailable or dismissive, leading the avoidant child to suppress their feelings and rely on themselves instead. Over time, this creates a deep-seated belief that emotional dependence is dangerous or weak. So the avoidant learns to present a facet of self-sufficiency and emotional control, even if it means feeling isolated inside. This misunderstanding is why avoidants often get labeled unfairly as cold, distant, or uninterested. None of these labels capture the reality of their internal world, which is often filled with conflicting emotions and a profound sense of loneliness. The avoidance emotional self-protection looks like strength, but it's actually a form of self-preservation born from fear and past pain. What's critical to understand is that avoidants don't want to feel this way. They don't choose to be distant to hurt others or because they don't want relationships. Their avoidance is an unconscious way to protect themselves from what feels like an overwhelming threat, losing control of their emotions and being left vulnerable to heartbreak. This also means that avoidants may struggle deeply with intimacy and emotional expression, not because they lack the capacity for love or connection, but because the pain they associate with those experiences is so intense that avoidance becomes the default coping strategy. It's a paradox. They long for connection, yet they keep it at bay to protect themselves. This internal conflict can lead to cycles of pushing people away, then feeling lonely and craving closeness again, only to push away once more. Understanding this dynamic is the first step toward compassion for avoidants and for those who love them. It's not about blaming or judging, it's about recognizing the fear behind the distance, the pain behind the walls, and the human need for connection that exists even when it's hidden. The avoidance distance is a call for help, even if it doesn't look like one on the surface. Avoidants build emotional walls, not out of cruelty or a lack of care, but because they have learned that protecting themselves from emotional pain is essential to their survival. These walls are carefully constructed defenses meant to keep others at a safe distance, preventing the deep hurt and rejection they fear. Unlike someone who might casually keep their guard up, avoidance emotional barriers are a deeply ingrained pattern, developed over years as a way to cope with the vulnerability that intimacy demands. For them, love and connection can feel like double-edged swords. They are deeply desired, but also terrifying because they open the door to possible heartbreak. These emotional walls are not just random defenses, they are a response to real or perceived threats from the past. Many avoidants have experienced relationships, often in childhood, where showing vulnerability led to pain, neglect, or emotional unavailability from important caregivers. As a result, they learn early on that depending on others or showing true feelings could be dangerous. So instead of reaching out for comfort or support, they became experts at shutting down those needs and retreating into self-reliance. This pattern becomes so automatic that they might not even consciously realize they're building these walls. It feels like the only safe way to be. The walls manifest in many ways: emotional distance, reluctance to share feelings, avoidance of deep conversations, or even pulling away when things start to get serious. These behaviors can confuse partners and friends who may misinterpret them as disinterest or a lack of commitment. However, the avoidance primary motivation is not to push others away because they want to be alone, but to avoid the intense discomfort of vulnerability. For avoidance, vulnerability is a risk they aren't sure they can handle. So they create boundaries to regulate their emotional exposure and maintain control over their feelings. This control is crucial for avoidance. Unlike anxious individuals who might express their fears openly, avoidants tend to suppress emotions and maintain a sense of composure, often convincing themselves and others that they are fine on their own. The emotional walls give them a sense of safety because they can manage how much they reveal and how much they allow others in. But this safety comes at a cost. These walls don't just keep others out. They can also isolate avoidance from themselves. By avoiding emotional closeness, they limit their ability to fully experience intimacy, trust, and the deep connection that relationships can offer. It's also important to note that avoidants don't build walls all the time. The defenses often fluctuate depending on the situation and the level of perceived risk. When they feel safe, they may let their guard down slightly, but the fear of being hurt can quickly trigger a retreat back behind the walls. This back and forth can create a confusing dynamic in relationships where the avoidance seems warm and engaged one moment, then distant and unreachable the next. It's not intentional inconsistency, but a protective dance to manage emotional overwhelm. Recognizing that these walls are not about rejecting love, but about avoiding pain helps shift the narrative. It allows partners and loved ones to respond with patience and understanding rather than frustration or resentment. When avoidants feel understood rather than pressured, they may begin to lower their defenses, gradually allowing themselves to experience connection without fear taking over. These walls, built from fear and past wounds, can eventually be softened, but it requires time, empathy, and safe space where vulnerability isn't met with judgment or abandonment. Ultimately, the emotional walls avoidance construct are less about pushing people away and more about a desperate attempt to stay safe in a world where opening up feels like a risk too great to bear. The struggle that avoidants face is often invisible to the outside world, but it's deeply real and profoundly lonely. Unlike those who openly express their fears or anxieties, avoidants tend to internalize their emotions and wear a mask of independence. This self-reliance is both a survival mechanism and a source of isolation. On the surface, avoidants might appear confident, composed, and in control. Yet beneath that facade, many grapple with a deep sense of loneliness, a feeling that is often complicated by the very strategies they use to protect themselves. Avoidants have learned to rely heavily on themselves, often because relying on others in the past led to disappointment or pain. This self-reliance can feel empowering. At first, it offers a sense of control and safety in a world where emotional needs can sometimes feel overwhelming or safe. But over time, leaning exclusively on oneself can create a paradoxical loneliness. The avoidant wants connection and intimacy, but doesn't know how to bridge the gap between their fear and their desire. This creates a silent tension inside, where the need for closeness is real, but the fear of getting hurt is so strong that it keeps them emotionally distant. Because avoidants don't usually voice their loneliness or fears, people around them might miss the depth of their struggle. They might assume that avoidants are simply uninterested in relationships or don't experience emotional pain the way others do. In reality, the avoidant's loneliness can be just as intense, if not more so, than the anxious person's more overt expressions of neediness. It's just expressed differently, hidden behind self-control and emotional distance rather than in the form of clinging or worry. This hidden loneliness can also create a sense of alienation. Avoidants may feel disconnected not only from others but from their own feelings as well. Because they have spent so much time suppressing or avoiding emotions to stay safe, they can sometimes struggle to identify or express what they're feeling. This emotional numbness can make it even harder for them to reach out or connect, reinforcing the cycle of isolation. Interestingly, avoidants often have a complex relationship with intimacy. They may deeply desire closeness and yet instinctively pull back when things start to get too real or intense. This push-pull dynamic can leave them feeling misunderstood and alone, even when they're in relationships. They might feel trapped in a constant balancing act, wanting love but fearing its demands, wanting connection but fearing loss of independence. This internal conflict intensifies their sense of loneliness because it keeps them from fully engaging with others in a way that feels safe and authentic. Despite all this, avoidants often don't see themselves as victims or sufferers. They pride themselves on their independence and ability to handle things alone. But underneath that pride is a vulnerability that rarely gets acknowledged. Their loneliness is a quiet ache that doesn't come with outward signs, and this can make it hard for them to seek or accept help. The silent struggle of loneliness wrapped in self-reliance is one of the most misunderstood aspects of avoidant attachment. It's a pain that is often invisible, yet it shapes how avoidants relate to the world and the people they care about. Understanding this silent battle is key to offering them the empathy and patience they need, because behind the walls and the independence is a person who craves genuine connection just as much as anyone else. Avoidants live with a paradox at the core of their emotional experience. They secretly crave intimacy, that they instinctively push it away. This push-pull dynamic can be confusing, both to those who are close to avoidance and to the avoidants themselves. On one hand, they desire closeness and connection because it brings comfort, understanding, and a sense of belonging. On the other hand, intimacy also brings vulnerability, uncertainty, and a risk of being hurt, things avoidants find deeply unsettling. So they develop strategies to keep intimacy at bay, even when their heart longs for it. This behavior often starts as an unconscious response. When an avoidant begins to feel close to someone, their brain triggers alarm bells, a survival response rooted in past experiences where closeness might have led to pain, rejection, or loss. To protect themselves, they pull away emotionally or physically before the relationship can deepen too much. This distancing acts like a safety valve, releasing the pressure of emotional intensity that feels overwhelming. The avoidant may suddenly become distant, detached, or harder to reach, even if moments before they seemed warm and engaged. It's important to realize that this pushing away isn't about disinterest or a lack of love. Quite the opposite, many avoidants care deeply but have developed a way to regulate their emotions that prioritizes self-preservation over connection. They may avoid difficult conversations, resist opening up about their feelings, or deflect intimacy with humor or sarcasm. These behaviors are attempts to keep their emotional world manageable and to avoid feeling exposed. For the avoidant, the pain of vulnerability outweighs the potential joy of closeness, at least until they feel more secure. This pattern creates a frustrating cycle. The avoidant pushes intimacy away, which can lead their partner or loved ones to feel rejected or confused. This distance can then trigger a reaction, whether it's anxiety, frustration, or withdrawal, that reinforces the avoidant's fears and causes them to retreat even further. It's a dance of emotional tug-of-war, where both parties want connection but struggle to find a safe way to get there. Avoidants might not always fully understand their own motivations. The act of pushing intimacy away can feel automatic or instinctual rather than a deliberate choice. It can also create internal conflict because on a deeper level, they may crave the very closeness they avoid. This conflict often leads to feelings of guilt or self-criticism for being unable to maintain intimacy, which only adds to the emotional complexity they navigate. Recognizing this dynamic is crucial for anyone involved with an avoidant. It's not helpful to interpret their distancing as rejection or lack of care. Instead, it's important to see it as a protective response to fear. Patience and understanding are key. Creating an environment where the avoidant feels safe to gradually lower their defenses without pressure or judgment can help them experience intimacy without the overwhelming fear that usually accompanies it. Over time, with consistent safety and trust, avoidants can learn that closeness doesn't have to mean loss of control or inevitable pain. They can develop healthier ways to connect, expressing their needs and emotions more openly. But this process takes time and compassion because pushing intimacy away is a deeply ingrained habit born out of self-protection. In essence, avoidants push intimacy away not because they don't want it, but because they fear what intimacy demands of them. Their craving for connection exists alongside a profound need for safety, and balancing these needs is a lifelong journey. Understanding this can open the door to deeper empathy, healthier relationships, and ultimately healing. Understanding and compassion are essential when it comes to helping avoidants break down the barriers they've built around themselves. These walls are not built out of choice or indifference, but out of deep-seated fear and past experiences that have taught them to protect their hearts at all costs. When people respond to avoidance with judgment, frustration, or impatience, it only reinforces their need to retreat further into their emotional fortress. Instead, approaching avoidance with empathy and patience can create a safe space where they feel less threatened and more willing to open up. Compassion means recognizing that avoidants are not intentionally trying to hurt others or avoid intimacy. They are doing the best they can with the emotional tools they have. This perspective shifts the focus from blaming or labeling avoidants as cold or unavailable to seeing them as individuals struggling with vulnerability. It encourages us to look beyond their behaviors and understand the fears and pain driving those behaviors. When avoidants sense that others understand their struggle without judgment, it can reduce their fear of rejection and help them feel accepted as they are. This acceptance is critical because avoidants often worry that if they expose their true selves, their fears, their needs, their vulnerabilities, they will be abandoned or criticized. When compassion is extended, it becomes possible for avoidants to take small risks in vulnerability, knowing they won't be met with negativity. This can gradually soften their defenses and allow for genuine emotional connection. It's a process that requires time and consistency. Avoidants need to experience repeated moments of safety to rewrite the patterns their brains have learned over years. Helping avoidants heal also involves encouraging them to reflect on their own feelings and recognize their emotional needs. Many avoidants have spent so long suppressing or denying their vulnerabilities that they may have lost touch with what they truly want or feel. Compassionate support includes gently guiding them to reconnect with their emotions in a non-threatening way. This might mean encouraging open communication, validating their experiences, and normalizing the idea that needing others is natural and human. It's also important for those close to avoidance to set healthy boundaries and communicate their own needs clearly. Compassion doesn't mean tolerating unhealthy behavior or sacrificing one's own emotional well-being. Rather, it's about creating a balanced dynamic where both parties feel heard and respected. When avoidants see that relationships can be spaces of mutual respect and understanding, they may become more willing to engage authentically. Healing for avoidance often involves learning new ways to cope with vulnerability and emotional intimacy. With understanding and compassion, they can start to challenge the old beliefs that keep them guarded. They can discover that being open doesn't necessarily lead to pain or loss, but can instead lead to deeper connection and fulfillment. This transformation can be life-changing, allowing avoidance to build more satisfying and meaningful relationships. Ultimately, compassion is a bridge between fear and connection. It's the key that can unlock avoidance hearts and help them step out of isolation into a space where they can experience love and intimacy without fear. It's not a quick fix, but with patience, empathy, and understanding, avoidance can begin to rewrite their stories and create healthier, happier relationships in the end. It's important to remember that avoidants are not simply cold or uninterested in love. They are people who have learned to protect themselves in the only way they know how. Their journey is one of courage, navigating the delicate balance between the desire for connection and the fear of vulnerability. By approaching avoidance with understanding and compassion, we can help them feel safe enough to lower their defenses and embrace the intimacy they secretly crave. Healing is possible, and genuine connection can flourish when patience and empathy guide the way. Thank you all for listening and being open to exploring this often hidden side of human connection. If we can carry this understanding forward, not only will we improve our relationships with avoidance, but we will also foster a more compassionate and loving world for everyone. Thank you again for your time. Take care. And remember, sometimes the deepest struggles are the ones we don't see. Let's be kind to each other as we all work through them. Goodbye.